Washington Caucasus now, I'm Orkan Amashov. The confrontation between Iran and Israel has reached a new apogee. Uncertainty looms large. The potential fallout is incalculable, and the South Caucasus is far from immune. What has been the reaction of the regional actors to this crisis so far? In what form and shape have they felt its impact? And what measures are being taken to contain the risk of spillover? Let's try to understand.
Iran and Israel are no longer merely trading barbed exhortations and veiled threats. Gone too are the days of limited proxy warfare. The two arch-rivals are now locked in a phase of direct, active, and deadly confrontation. This latest escalation is sending tremors well beyond the immediate theater. It may not amount to a full-scale war, but it is a conflict with the potential for devastating consequences, not only for its direct participants, but also for those in the vicinity and in between. The South Caucasus, lying just to the north of Iran, is relatively insulated, though not immune, from the effects of the crisis. Both Azerbaijan and Armenia share land borders with Iran, and while there are no Israeli or American military installations in the region, the perception of threat is, as ever, a matter of subjective interpretation. All three regional countries are treading carefully, practicing, in their own way, what is now fashionably called the geopolitical balancing act, while adhering to their existing alignments. Concerns are palpable in all three capitals, from humanitarian risks to the prospect of refugee flows and fears of radiological contamination. The list of worries is long. Whatever the scale of the fallout, the consensus is clear: it must be contained. In Armenia, which has developed intimate ties with Iran, the tone is markedly less neutral. Yerevan has condemned what it described as a unilateral Israeli attack on Iranian territory. While its official rhetoric is laced with diplomatic caution, the overall posture tilts unmistakably towards Tehran. Still, Armenia's options are limited, and so is its capacity to act. In Azerbaijan, the government has expressed deep concern over the recent Israeli military operation against Iran. Baku also reaffirmed its long-standing position. Its territory will not be used by any foreign state against a third party, including Iran. Baku swiftly and unequivocally dismissed rumors to the contrary. Despite its close strategic partnership with Israel, Azerbaijan has recently made notable progress in normalizing ties with Iran, a process crowned by President Pezeshkian's recent visit. For Baku, neutrality remains the key pillar of its diplomatic messaging. Georgia, very much like Azerbaijan, has maintained its traditional emphasis on regional stability. Its foreign ministry expressed deep concern over rising tensions in the Middle East, calling for restraint and a return to dialogue. This crisis unfolds at a time when the South Caucasus itself is undergoing transformation. Baku and Yerevan are edging closer to a historic peace agreement, a development intimately linked with the Turkish-Armenian normalization process. The former enables the latter. It is also in this context that Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's visit to Istanbul takes on added importance. Though planned prior to the most recent escalation, the trip has come to symbolize an effort towards wider regional conciliation. Only a day earlier, President Ilham Aliyev attended the inauguration of the Azerbaijan Quarter in Kahramanmaraş, a city devastated by earthquake 2 years ago. That visit was another vivid demonstration of the enduring Azerbaijani-Turkish alliance, providing vital context for Pashinyan's own journey the following day. The Iran-Israel crisis is poised to test the balance of the South Caucasus. Today's regional landscape appears to have three key components: a peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the normalization of Armenian-Turkish ties, and deeper regional integration involving Georgia. What this crisis ultimately means for all three remains to be seen.
And joining me now to explore the implications of Israel-Iran confrontation for the South Caucasus are Boris Novosadian, political commentator from Yerevan, Armenia, George Michelishvili, professor at the European University based in Tbilisi, and Rusif Huseinov, director of the Caucasus Policy Analysis Center. Welcome to all three of you.
Good afternoon. Hello. Thank you for inviting.
For some considerable time, we have not designed this tripartite structure involving experts from Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. It looks like that external shock, external crisis, has induced us to actually reconsider this particular moment. And my first question is going to be addressed to you, Boris. Before discussing specific circumstances related to respective countries, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, I would like to put to you a broad question, and I want a brief reflection. How vulnerable is the South Caucasus to this crisis? When you compare South Caucasus to other regions within the wider Middle East, what is the degree of susceptibility of this region to the external crisis?
I think the specifics of our region is that it is squeezed between two huge conflicts. One is Russian-Ukrainian and another one Israeli-Iranian. And this has implications on different spheres of our life, including transport, communication, trade and economy, and even environment. And in this situation, I guess only collective efforts of the three countries of the South Caucasus could be adequate response to the challenges that appear in immediate neighborhood to us, especially that we see certain perspectives of expansion of the conflict between Israel and Iran. The initial forecast that it could end in 2 weeks does not prove to be true. So we have to be prepared for longer process, and this means some strategic solutions from all three countries.
Thank you very much, Boris. George, same question to you. Where does the South Caucasus stand amongst the regions most vulnerable to potential spillover from the escalating confrontation between Iran and Israel? And of course, everybody understands that although the South Caucasus is considered part of Iran's immediate neighborhood, this area, lying more directly between the two belligerents, Israel and Iran, is to bear the brunt of the fallout. But still, what is the degree of susceptibility of this region when it comes to these escalating tensions between Tehran and Tel Aviv?
Well, indeed, it is a very important and topical question, very burning one. Obviously, so our region is not as like in a direct quagmire. It doesn't like in between these two warring sides and doesn't have much stakes. But well, the two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, border Iran. And even if there are no political fallout implications, the potential humanitarian crisis, well, if, God forbid, there is an exodus of peaceful population of citizens of Iran trying to flee the conflict. So one of the places, one of the potential directions is South Caucasus. We have seen there is already some stream of Iranians coming to Armenia and actually taking the hotels in the south. Well, this is application. Georgia doesn't border Iran, but as the crow flies, it's about 300 kilometers, which is also pretty close. Well, if and again, so I very much hope that this scenario will not materialize. If there is a humanitarian crisis, all three countries, maybe to a different extent, might feel that pressure. Also, there are some other implications. It is generally Iran was believed to be an Armenian, I wouldn't say ally, but partner in terms of trade. I think so. Significant chunk, don't know exactly, but certain chunk of Armenian trade is related to Iran. It could also have economic implications. And also, well, again, I very much hope that the conflict will go that far and it comes to the potential dismemberment of Iran when the state becomes so weak that it can hardly hold the certain centripetal forces. But again, we shouldn't forget that the composition of Iran is very complicated. There is a significant minority of Azerbaijanis. Well, the president is also ethnic Azerbaijani. This is also, I would say, potential susceptibility point. Well, again, my hope that conflict will not grow into something serious, and historians will not refer to it at the beginning of the Third World War. And so all these threats will remain threats, but of course we should be very cautious. Well, there is a simple answer to the question: what does the conflict bode for the South Caucasus? Nothing good.
Thank you, George. Rusif, we all understand that geographically, Azerbaijan is neighboring with Iran. That's, geographically, Azerbaijan is very close to the conflict. But geopolitically, how close is the region, South Caucasus, not just Azerbaijan? Within this first round, we are discussing the wider regional sort of scope. How close is this region to the epicenter of this conflict, you think, geopolitically?
Well, thank you, Orhan. I would definitely agree with what Boris said earlier, that we, South Caucasus, are squeezed between the two theaters of war, which are very brutal, which are very violent. Yes, South Caucasus has not been a place of peace and stability for the past 3 decades. We had our own conflicts, but what is happening in Ukraine or the Middle East, it is a different level, which we are not used to. George mentioned the humanitarian crisis, which 3 countries in South Caucasus can face. I would go a little bit further and can actually refer to the radioactive exposure, because there have been some rumors in different media outlets amongst the people who said that once the Israeli air forces bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, it will definitely affect the regional environment. If we face some sort of civil war inside Iran, it will definitely affect with a lot of the layers and dimensions, ethnic confrontation, religious, maybe violence, etc. Therefore, we, as South Caucasus, of course, should remain uninvolved in what is happening in Iran, but at the same time should be prepared for different scenarios.
Very clear. So the neutrality is going to guide the thinking of the 3 nations, but there must be absolute sort of reaction, the preparedness to any potential fallout. Boris, Armenia and Iran have cultivated very strong, very close, intimate relations over the past few years. What have you made of the official reaction of the Armenian government to this crisis so far? How do you think government is handling this crisis? And what has been the real impact of this crisis as long as Armenia's trade relations with Iran are concerned?
In fact, the official reaction of Yerevan was condemning Israel and supporting Iran, although I don't think that it was a wise solution. Because the consequences of that conflict could have different kind of impacts on Armenia in terms of its foreign policy. So I would say that Armenia had to stay neutral like Georgia and Azerbaijan did, especially that it is very difficult to put the burden of, let's say, responsibility of this conflict on one or the other side. Unfortunately, the unresolved contradictions between the 2 countries brought us to the situation that now their relations are so much antagonistic that escaping the war looked impossible. So in that situation,
yes. So when I earlier said about neutrality, I said that it looks like, after reflecting on Rusif's answer, when I said that it looks like the neutrality will be guiding the thinking of these 3 countries, it does not necessarily apply to Armenia, because Armenia's foreign ministry issued a statement accusing Israeli side of the unilateral action against Iran. But do you think that it will move beyond diplomatic rhetoric?
No, I don't think so, because I guess that Armenia took good lessons from previous mistakes, and now Armenia will try to cooperate with its neighbors to resolve, as I mentioned, the conflict collectively. Otherwise, remaining alone before the threats, Armenia will hardly be able to find good responses to it. Especially that, as I mentioned, we have different levels of consequences, negative consequences. 2 of them are already actual, One was, of course, the problems with trade and economic relations of Armenia with some important partners, including Gulf countries, including Iran itself, including Iraqi Kurdistan. And now all these trade and economic relations are stopped. The second level is ongoing and becoming more and more important. This is flow of migrants, of refugees from Iran, especially that Armenia has already a quite big Armenian community there, and especially the fact that Armenia already hosted refugees from Ukraine, Russia, from Syria, from Lebanon, and also displaced people from Nagorno-Karabakh. So this means that Armenia faces real social challenges, and responding to that should be the actual political priorities for Armenian government. And one more threat that has to be taken into account by Armenia and all three countries is if the conflict continues longer, then the chance that a nuclear weapon could be used is becoming quite realistic. As I mentioned, collective efforts and wise politics is now the main thing which we have to think all together.
George, a very similar question to you. Do you think that a position maintained by the government of Georgia could be aptly described as being perfectly neutral?
Well, so far it is neutral, and I believe that, well, Georgia, given its very modest size and political influence, can hardly afford taking side in this particular regard. In terms of social preferences, well, obviously Georgia understand what sort of character is the Iranian regime, and given these ties of Georgia with Israel, I mean human ties. Obviously, the majority is on the side of Israel, but obviously there are some people actually asking questions to what extent the attack was warranted. But on the state level, there is so far a neutrality. So I believe that, like most Armenia, Azerbaijan, I would say they do have some, I would say, more recent and important and influential history with Israel and Iran. I mentioned a partnership between Armenia and Iran. On the other hand, Israeli, I would say, assistance, but weaponry help Baku to gain the edge over Yerevan, along with other help. First and foremost, actually, Turkey, but also Israel. Israeli weaponry helped Azerbaijan gain an edge over Armenia in the 44-day war. And also, there was potential visit of Israeli Prime Minister to Baku, which was cancelled, but still it suggests that relations between Israel and Baku are pretty warm. I mean, not completely cordial, but pretty good.
I see. Well, Rusif, Azerbaijan's position is quite interesting. Azerbaijan has cultivated a strategic partnership with Israel over the past decades. It's a very important compartment of Azerbaijan's foreign policy, but also recently Azerbaijan has normalized its relations with Iran, and President Pezeshkian was in Baku very recently, and it looks like that Azerbaijan is very, very careful indeed to make sure that its neutrality is very palpable, and everybody understands that Azerbaijan is not an actor here. Azerbaijan also made very clear that its territory will not be used under no circumstances by any country against any third party, including Iran. What do you make of Azerbaijan's position and the extent of the neutrality demonstrated by the government?
Mm-hmm. Indeed, Azerbaijan's geopolitical alignments and preferences are no secret. You just said, and there are tons of materials about Azerbaijan-Israeli cooperation, which had been developed for the past 30 years. At the same time, Azerbaijan and Iran are enjoying uneasy relations, which can normalize at some points, but overall we have fundamental differences between the two countries. Having said this, we Azerbaijanis bear in mind that at this sensitive moment, neutrality is the best policy, because as we can recall from the previous occasions, whenever Israeli-Iranian confrontation took place, the Iranian policymakers, some of very hawkish politicians, they always pointed out to Azerbaijan as an easy target, as Israel's ally. Therefore, we should not. We should try to refrain from any provocative actions, despite all these rumors circulating on the internet about Azerbaijan's alleged involvement, which was definitely refuted by the officials in Baku. Last but not least, political neutrality is the government's policy, but at the same time, there is societal approach, there is emotional attachment to what is happening in Iran, because one of the biggest targets of Israeli airstrikes has been Tabriz, an ancient Azerbaijani city, and I hear from many fellow Azerbaijanis how much they regret about that.
Indeed, yeah, but it's very interesting actually in terms of diplomatic positions maintained by three countries. In the case of Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan does of course have strategic partnership with Israel, but that partnership does not extend to maintaining any particular view regarding Iran, this conflict between Iran and Israel. Azerbaijan is neutral here. With Armenia, it's also very interesting. On a rhetorical level, as I have understood from what Boris said, Armenia unilaterally accused Israel of unilateral actions, but that diplomatic tone is unlikely to transform into practical actions on the ground. So there is a degree of also neutrality as long as Armenia is concerned, and Georgia is also neutral. In the light of what is happening now, this is a crisis, of course. Boris, what do you think about the implication for the South Caucasus when it comes to the question of consolidation? Do you think in the face of this looming crisis, and bearing in mind its potential deadly implications and the mighty spillover, this will make these countries consider what we described earlier, the House of Caucasus, in a more effective, in a more imminent sense? What do you think? Will it lead to more consolidation, or will it actually provide opportunities for these countries to sort out some of their internal issues? When it comes to internal issues, of course, it refers to the Azerbaijani-Armenian context.
I think that both scenarios are still possible, because we saw several times that the countries of our region try to use the changing situation for their benefits and to get more. However, at the same time, I think the understanding is that each country alone cannot find adequate response to this challenge. That is caused by the war between Israel and Iran, and also the situation to the north of our region. So I hope that extensive dialogue between the leaders of our countries and diplomatic circles could bring to some common solutions, and considering common and mutual interests in this very dangerous situation. We also have to take into account quite specific role of another our neighbor, Turkey, which is the closest strategic partner or ally of Azerbaijan, but in the same time, Turkey is also accusing Israel and has a different stance towards the conflict. This means that the dynamic and quickly changing situation in our region proves that we have to be more flexible and more adequately reacting to the situation. Let us look at such countries as United States. Within few months, it may change the geopolitical stance on very different issues. And if the country that is so powerful can be flexible under the given circumstances, I think our three much smaller and much less influential states have also to be ready for any changes in the geopolitical in this difficult geopolitical situation.
George, effectively same question to you. How do you envision the impact of this conflict on the regional consolidation? As they say, God moves in the mysterious way. We don't know what will happen. But of course, if you take the conflict in Ukraine when it started in February 2022, it has had some impact on this region as well. It allowed Azerbaijan to perhaps curb Russian influence. It led to certain actions on the ground, and we achieved the new status quo effectively in September 2023. And that status quo now, the fact that Azerbaijan and Armenia could sign a peace deal, could be deemed as a potential precursor to further regional consolidation. This is one way of looking at it. But in the context of what's happening regarding Iran and in terms of Iranian influence and interest in this region, do you think, allow me to be very brief and direct, what does considerably weakened Iran signify for this region?
So, well, Iran somehow influenced the calculus between Armenia and Azerbaijan, particularly regarding the corridor, as it expressed its desire for this corridor not to proceed. But again, so I think it will boil down to the political will and this strategic thinking of all three countries. In the first place, of course, Armenia and Azerbaijan, which border Iran and which have stakes because of the relation between Iran, Armenia, and Azerbaijan on one hand, and Azerbaijan, Israel on the other hand. Georgia, in this particular situation, is relatively neutral and remote, is not that directly involved. So, but we see from history, I very much hope that if push comes to shove and the situation in Iran and around Iran becomes really grave, so we will see the situation similar to this creation of the European Union, when the common threat from the East, in that case, from the Soviet Union, so induced Western European countries, the countries which few years before, were involved in the brutal Second World War, were killing each other's citizens in hundreds of thousands, they started creating the European Union, the most successful integration project, in my opinion, in the history of the humankind. Well, I very much hope that this common threat or potential, so my hope that it will be the potentiality of the threat will not materialize, but the risk will somehow induce the countries to cooperate, because they understand it boils down to their own security. Again, so as a citizen of Georgia, you probably understand my special suspicion with regard to Russia. If for some reason the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the Russian aggression of Ukraine, somehow stops and there is a sort of agreement, it might signify that the end of the window of opportunity for Armenia, Azerbaijan, and as well as Georgia, for the South Caucasus to move forward. And again, so I mean, the cooperation and understanding that the fates of the three countries are intertwined, and the region, this fully fledged South Caucasus region, it represents a significantly stronger geopolitical entity than any of the three countries separately. I think this understanding will prevail. That's my point.
So between consolidation and the other option, you would choose the former, not the latter. It's not about choosing, it's about thinking is as more probable than the other option. Rissif, Azerbaijan has found itself in a very interesting position. It has made very clear that its territory cannot be used by any country against third party. It has adopted neutrality, but we also understand that any crisis, whatever that crisis may be, also means a degree of opportunity. So there are certain projects involving Iran. One of them is South-North Corridor. This conflict is probably going to have some bearing upon that particular project. I don't know what will happen to the Aras Corridor project in the light of what's happening now. And there are some other elements to be taken into account. How do you think this moment will affect Azerbaijan's approach to regional consolidation?
Each of three South Caucasus countries has their own approach towards Iran. In the case of Georgia, it's more or less neutral. For Armenia, a stronger Iran means some sort of balancing, especially against Azerbaijan. For Azerbaijan, assertive, aggressive Iran is, of course, is a threat. Therefore, we definitely want Iran to be less assertive in this region. And after all, I understand George's concern, and we already discussed different scenarios, the various implications of this conflict, starting from the humanitarian catastrophe all the way to the radioactive exposure. But I also recall, of course, I was a kid back then, but based on what I have studied, that in the late 1980s and early 1990s, many Western politicians were also afraid of the possible collapse of the Soviet Union. And the US President, George Bush, even was begging the Ukrainian authorities not to secede from the USSR in order not to create instability in this wider region. However, the collapse of that empire created opportunities and, led to independent states in this wider region. So any crisis also creates opportunities for the regional countries.
Well, let me be more specific, Rusif. With Iran, Azerbaijan's relations have always been incredibly complicated. And you earlier wrote, I think a couple of weeks ago, a very interesting piece about Azerbaijani-Iranian relations, whether Pezeshkian's trip to Baku will really mark a significant milestone or not, because we know that there are different schools of thought inside Iran as well about the way in which the relation with Baku must be maintained. But the reality is that Iran has proven to be a very resilient entity. And of course, quite often when there was an element of crisis, everybody was talking about the change of some magnitude, but that has never materialized. But what specifically I'm talking about, we know that Iran has primarily opposed to Azerbaijan's Zengezur corridor project over the past few years. Of course, Armenia has got its own objection fundamentally on the basis of extraterritoriality. What I'm effectively trying to ask, bearing in mind that Iran is one of those actors which has opposed to this particular project, could it potentially increase the possibility of Azerbaijan and Armenia on a bilateral basis, forming consensus on the Zengezur corridor, with Iranian influence being somewhat weakened? That's what I meant by my question originally, actually.
I understand. I don't want to speculate in this regard. It's really difficult to directly answer this one. But I would rather speak about the general geopolitical environment which Iran creates for the region, especially for Azerbaijan. And as you already mentioned, the relations between the two countries have always been uneasy. And one of my colleagues put it very, very perfectly. We are Iran's Ukraine. The way the Russians treat Ukraine, Iran sees Azerbaijan. Therefore, it's been very tricky in our case.
Yes, indeed, yeah. It's a very interesting comparison. I think that particular comparison was also made by Taras Kuzio a few years ago in one of his articles. Boris, let's move into the realm involving Turkey. Turkey is an incredibly important actor. Earlier, with Ambassador Ayhan Nurhan and also Ahmad Alili discussed this triangle involving Ankara, Baku and Yerevan. And Prime Minister Pashinyan is visiting Ankara. This visit is taking place against, naturally, backdrop of all of these developments. President Aliyev was in Turkey. What do you make of Turkey's role in the current, under the current circumstances? And how will the current crisis involving Iran, do you think, change Armenia's attitude towards Ankara, towards Turkish-Armenian normalization?
First of all, I think that we have to put aside all emotional and psychological hardships in the relations between our countries. I mean, for Armenia, it's Turkey and Azerbaijan, and look to the problems as more pragmatically as possible. Because indeed, the development of our countries, the security of our countries, it demands constructive solutions of different issues, including the road on the territory of Armenia and connecting Azerbaijan with continental Azerbaijan with Nakhichevan. For Armenia, this road is necessary to overcome the difficulties that appeared in our trade relations with the countries to the south of Armenia. So I guess that this is also in the interest of many other international players, because the territory of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia is becoming a narrow corridor, which does not have any alternative for the trade between West and East. And we have to understand the responsibility of our region for the global processes, for the global stability, security, and normal relations. And I guess this responsibility should lead us to find all the solutions. And although the visit of Nikol Pashinyan to Turkey was planned yet before the crisis between Israel and Iran, but I guess the whole situation in our region was prompting that we have to find new solutions and find new ways to face the challenges. So now the visit is taking place in the situation when Turkey, I think, is also interested in opening the roads crossing our region, because it is the main factor that could increase the international role and importance of Turkey itself. So I don't think that there will be fast solutions during this visit of Pashinyan. If there would be a fast solution, I think President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, would stay in Turkey one day longer to have a trilateral format. But I think anyway, the consultations, at least that are taking place now in Istanbul, are quite important, and they, I hope, will open the way towards resolution of the main problems that is becoming so important in the context of this crisis in Iran.
Thank you, Boris. And George, I would like to pose the same question to you about Turkey's role in the light of the current crisis involving Iran.
Well, Turkey is a, I'd say, heavyweight neighbor, which is very directly involved in the region, particularly in the like tripartite strategic partnership between Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan. It has been working for decades. Obviously, it has a stake. Obviously, kind of these like domestic purposes, and maybe but because of his persuasions, Erdogan has been for years, for more than a decade, a vocal critic of Israel, and it was pretty predictable that what his stance would be on that particular configuration. Yes, of course, it is a, I would say, complicating factor that such close partners as Azerbaijan and Turkey hold different positions on such a crucial and geopolitically burning issue. So, but again, I believe that the stakes for the region are more important. Turkey is interested, probably more than any other country, in this stable, peaceful South Caucasus, and I believe kind of that's what will be guiding Turkish policy.
Rusif, effectively, one of the key underlying factors, one of the key undercurrents of this conversation was based on there is a risk, externally induced risk, to which this region should react. And what will be the response? Will it be a collective response, or will it be the process leading further disagreements between the regional actors? And my feeling is that on the basis of this conversation, on the basis of analysis that I've heard from Boris, George, and from you, the element of further consolidation prevails over other possibilities. Is that the right conclusion that I've derived from this conversation? What do you think?
None of the countries in the wider region, I would include in here the Middle East, South Caucasus, or North Africa, none of these actors, even the most anti-Israeli ones, tried not to get involved. More than this, Israel's biggest ally, the United States, is also very careful about waging war on Iran, because everyone realizes that this confrontation can easily turn into a nightmare, into a new global war. Therefore, everyone is quite careful about the possible implications.
Yeah, indeed. The terminology employed by many journalists, analysts, and even diplomats, mostly they relate to that sense of caution. Pandora's box, a can of worms, and some other terms of the same nature have been employed in relation to this crisis. But I'm most grateful to all of you, Boris Navasadian, George Michalishvili, and Rusif Husseinov. Thank you very much indeed for your time and for your analysis. Most grateful.
Thank you to Orhan. Goodbye.
Bye. Well, the world is changing, not beyond recognition perhaps, but in ways that are undeniably palpable. And as the Middle East undergoes some form of profound reconfiguration, the South Caucasus will need to react and adapt. What matters for now is containment, containing the fallout before it spills too far. Well, you've been watching Caucasus Now. I see you very soon indeed.